Hello, everyone. Good evening. Happy Douglas Week to you all, and happy Black History Month to everyone watching in the US. A very warm welcome from the Douglas Week team. I'm Dr. Caroline Dunham-Schroeder. I'm the founder of Douglas Week, and a very big thank you all for tuning in today to this wonderful event. And also thank you to this exciting panel and the panelists for being here with us today. And also with me here is my wonderful colleague and friend, and also Douglas Week co-founder, Kristen Leary, and also Dr. Tim Gronland, who's also a good friend and co-founder of Douglas Week. It's really hard to believe that this is one of our last events of Douglas Week 2022, Kristen, isn't it?
It is hard to believe, but here we are on the last day of Douglas Week, and thanks everyone for being with us here today. A warm welcome to all of you and to everyone watching as well. Happy Douglas Week. Happy last day of Douglas Week. We've heard so many wonderful speakers throughout the course of the week talking about themes like representation, allyship, resilience, agency, changing the narrative, creating space, and that's what we aim to do here, is create some space, safe space to talk about these and other issues, and we can't wait to talk with you all more about that today.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm very excited for this panel. I've been very much looking forward to this. And I'm glad that you have all joined us. And we'll hand over to our lovely friend Tim in a second there. But first, we wanted to just take a little minute to tell you about Douglas Week. Kristen, do you want to start us off?
Oh, sure. We created Douglas Week. Really, Caroline created Douglas Week with Tim and with our other colleague, Sarah McCready, in 2019 in Ireland. And Ireland will always be our anchor as we continue doing the Douglas Week event series throughout the world. But the series was created to celebrate and commemorate Frederick Douglass, his family, their work and their legacy, and their inspiration. And as I mentioned earlier, to provide a platform and a safe space for dialogue with other change makers like those joining us here today from around the world. And the guiding principles of Douglas Week are connectedness, collaboration, and co-creation. And we're very happy that our panelists here are joining us in celebrating and really using those themes in their work personally, but here with us during Douglas Week as well, and sharing their work and their research with us. And we're really excited to continue the conversation with you all.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kristen. I think that this Douglas Week community has really grown, and I'm really delighted to say we've added quite a few more friends this week, and it's really great how much this community has grown since 2019. And we have, like you said, audiences joining us from around the world today on YouTube, but also rewatching later on our YouTube channel or through our website. And we can't wait to see it grow more. So thank you all for being part of it. Thank you for joining us. And don't worry, if you missed an event, you can check out all of the events here on our YouTube channel, or you can go to our website, which is www.douglasweek.org. Kristen, what else is there before we hand over to Tim?
Just quickly, Tim, before we hand over to you, a few pieces of housekeeping. This event is scheduled to last for about 45 minutes. And as Caroline mentioned, if you have questions, you can submit them through our chat here on our YouTube channel. We'll be monitoring that. We'll pass them on to our speakers and get them to respond. We ask that all participants, panelists, and attendees be mindful and respectful of our panelists and our other audience members. Inappropriate conduct will not be tolerated. Thank you very much for your consideration, and we really look forward to a great event.
Yeah, thank you everyone for making this a safe space and a great platform for very interesting conversations. And yeah, without further ado, I'd say thank you all again for being here. Welcome now to this next event called Publishing and Activism. Many thanks to you all for being here, a lovely group of panelists. And I'll hand over to Tim now to introduce everyone and to guide the conversation. So Tim, over to you.
Thanks so much, Caroline and Kristen. It is a pleasure to be hosting this event, and I can't wait to get going. Before we do that, I'll introduce myself. My name's Tim Gronland. I teach at the School of English, Irish and Communication at the University of Limerick. Yeah, again, good evening and welcome to this conversation about publishing and activism. We're going to be joined this evening by founders of 3 Irish publishing projects, all of them really exciting and new. The oldest of these projects started in 2018, so this is already fresh, and we're excited to host them as part of Douglas Week. So one of the great things about Douglas Week, as we discovered last year, is the way it gives us a chance not just to focus on Douglas himself, but to think creatively about how to commemorate his legacy and values today. This event is inspired by Douglas's activities as an editor and publisher, which are celebrated perhaps slightly less often than his well-known writings and speeches. So before I introduce our guests, I'll just say a few quick words about these activities and about Douglas to put this in context. So Douglas was a key figure in the publishing history of 19th century America. On his return from Ireland and Britain in 1847, after he visited these shores, he co-founded the North Star in Rochester, New York. That paper survived for over a decade and was then renamed Frederick Douglass's paper in 1851, and it ran till 1860. And there was also a sister paper called Douglass's Monthly, and between 1870 and 1874, Douglas edited the New National Era. So Douglas was very committed to this editing and publishing work, and he carried it on often in a very hands-on way over 4 decades across several different publications. Many contemporaries, in fact, felt that Douglas was even more effective as an editor than as a speaker. Scholar Sarah Meir writes that he was more actively anti-slavery than other Black editors and a keener advocate for women's rights. Readers praised his paper not only for speaking for Northern Black people, but also for publishing their own words on its letters page. And Douglas, as an editor, also solidified transnational links with British and Irish anti-slavery organizations to develop a sense of an international abolitionist community. These papers were political, cultural, and literary spaces that showed Douglas's understanding of the power of the press as a space to give a platform to different voices, to shape and influence public dialogue, and to strengthen communities. That's just a brief outline of Douglas's career as a publisher and activist, but it should give some sense of his achievements, as well as hopefully some of the reasons why we've invited Skein Press, Unapologetic magazine, and the Working Class Writing Archive to speak with us this evening. Each of these publishing projects can, in one way or another, be seen as an answer to the question of how to be a publisher and also an activist, how to create space for readers to discover work they might otherwise miss, how to challenge readers in ways that they might not otherwise be challenged, and how to create connections and make particular voices and communities more visible. So we're delighted to have them all with us. We're going to start off this evening with Gronland and Mojito from Skein Press. Skein Press is a writer-centered publishing house that supports writers traditionally underrepresented in Irish literature by publishing beautiful and thought-provoking books. And they also offer development opportunities designed to create a more inclusive literary landscape. Gronland O'Toole is an editor and human rights activist. She has an MA in creative writing from University College Dublin and has a background in social policy and law. She established Skein Press in 2018 to publish books featuring themes not often represented in Irish publishing. Gronland has worked in the community and voluntary sector for over 25 years at senior management level with a range of communities who are underrepresented in Irish society. Mojito Indy Henderson is a Canadian-American writer and actor based in Dublin. He's a graduate of University College Cork's MA in Creative Writing Programme, where he was a Putnam Scholar and a recipient of the Government of Ireland International Education Scholarships. He joined Scheme Press in 2021 and is committed to addressing barriers to education and progression within the arts. Grania and Mojito, you're very welcome. I will share this. I will share my screen now and invite you to tell us a bit more about Scheme Press.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks for having us here to be part of this discussion. Yes, we set up Scheme Press because I suppose it was speaking to a gap that we saw in Irish literature and publishing, and that there was very few books coming out from Ireland that reflected, I suppose, the richness and diversity of our culture. And I suppose to the heart of why Scheme established itself was to try and begin to contribute to addressing that gap. And we were very lucky to work with Malata Uche O'Curry, and we might just move on to the next slide there, Tim, who gave us the opportunity to produce her work. And her work was the first time stories from a migrant woman's perspective was put to the fore. So we definitely saw a huge audience for that work and a huge interest in that work. So again, for us, not only what we discovered on our journey was that the writers are there, but also the audiences are there, and that's a very exciting prospect. Because often we had heard, oh, people can't find the writers, and people only read certain types of books or certain types of material. So encouraged by that, I suppose we also want to get ahead of what was happening in the UK, and looking at research there. Britain being a very diverse society, but yet in publishing and literature, they were having huge struggles around getting representation. And it's beginning to be addressed now. There's been a number of reports and so on. So we didn't want that to happen in Ireland. So I suppose just a bit about our books. You identified that we publish books, but we're also very much about writer development. We're a writer-centered press. So basically what that means is that we put writers to the fore and help them realize their vision for their writing projects. So I suppose you can see there, I spoke a little bit just about Malatu's book. I suppose that was the first time one of Malatu's brilliant stories in her book, explores the whole nature of direct provision in Ireland in such an amazing way. And so it brings you in using literature and fiction into a kind of a lived reality in Ireland, which people found fascinating. So it was a whole aspect of life that people got to explore through this book that they hadn't before, for example. Our next book was Why the Moon Travels by Owen de Vardoon. And this was a kind of a groundbreaking book because it was the first time that a member of the traveller community curated their own work on their own terms. And you'll read in the introduction there how Owen talks about his book being, that a lot of their culture has been curated by settled folk or the majority population, which skews the lens. So this was very much about us creating a platform for Owen and Leanne McDonough, who was the illustrator on that, to create their own project. So our role there was very much supporting that in whatever way they defined. And then our third book there that we produced last year was Unsettled by Rosa McDonough. And again, that was trying to ensure that the editorial lens and the supports were there for Rosa to realise her vision and her book. So I suppose that's what we're trying to get closer to, which is very much aligned with our values. And I think Mojito is just going to come in there and talk about our values.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. So basically, there are three sort of core branches that of values that guide us at Scheme. And the first one is participation and inclusion. Essentially, as Grania explained, as a writer-centered publishing house, we believe strongly in close collaboration with our writers and artists throughout the whole production process. So that includes really listening to the writer's needs, and the specific challenges that come up with each project. The second one I have there is equality. And that's, just that we strive to create an equal working space sort of across are projects that everyone has a say in decisions, and artists actively participate in the production process, regardless of background or regardless of background or where they come from. So that's the second one. And then the third would be conscious learning. And that's just essentially saying that we won't get everything right, but we are always adapting to the needs of our artists and writers, and also adapting to the broader literary landscape here in Ireland, which is no small task, but it's important for us to really take into consideration the whole landscape when making our decisions. And so we're constantly striving to be better, and to hear what our authors' needs are. Thank you.
Thanks, Mojito. And yeah, I suppose just from that, I suppose that those principles and values inform our decision making, which is what we're trying to create. And I suppose just for this year coming up, we have some interesting new projects for 2022, and we will be having, we've developed a new concept in publishing, the Solstice Stories, which we just announced last week. And that's a platform, again, for an emerging writer to come together with an established writer in collaboration with a visual artist to design their own book and their own conversations. So we're providing a platform for that. And our first publication will be Poetry, Waking Light. There's a number of collaborators there, Kerry Doherty, Micheál McCann, there's Michelle Maloney, who's the photographer on that project, and Folded Leaf are making that book. So we're trying to create opportunities for greater collaboration and break down some of the boundaries, because for us it's all about pulling down barriers and opening up spaces for people to work together and to engage on literary projects and pursuits. We are delighted to have a book by All This Happened More or Less by Jane A. Kwan, and that will be coming out later in the year, where they chart their journey of transitioning through the death of their brother. And it's a fantastic collection of essays, and we're very excited about that. And then our other book is, again, I mentioned earlier, Own Devar Dún, Deirdre Sullivan and Yingi, who will produce a book together steeped in the oral tradition of the Traveller community, in folklore, aligned to the big dates of the year, the Wheel of the Year. So they are collaborating and working on that at the moment. So I suppose we try and do that. I suppose we're building new ways of trying to produce books and work on books together. So just on that, then I suppose what we try and do is support. We figured out earlier on that it's not just enough to produce a book, that will in itself will bring some change, but we also want to ensure that writers themselves can build their community and have supports to be able to move forward together. I'm just going to hand back to Mojito there, who's going to talk about our Play It Forward program that is about these structured supports that writers need to move into pathways and to be writers and be in publishing as well.
Right. Thanks, Grania. Yeah, so I actually joined the team to be the coordinator for the Play It Forward program. And what it is essentially it's a 18-month fellowship program that's aimed at underrepresented writers. And basically, it provides our fellows with the sort of structured support, including mentorship, editorial feedback, workshops, courses, literary events, etc., with partnerships through sort of major literary establishments here in Ireland, such as the Stinging Fly and the Irish Writers' Centre. So essentially, at its core, it's in a lot of master's programs, for example, many of the students have what's called the Business of Writing course, which essentially breaks down the industry, the information that you need to go to an agent, for example, or to go and submit your work, you submit your manuscript to be published. And so what this development program aims to do is provide that information that is so vital to the industry, provide that to people who wouldn't have had access to that in any way, be it migrants, be it underrepresented and marginalized communities here in Ireland. So yeah, essentially it's through providing all sorts of opportunities and information that's vital to the industry, we hope to include a much broader range of writers who are present in Ireland. That was something that we quickly learned. in our call out. We weren't sure how many people we would hear back from, but it exceeded our expectations greatly. And so there are writers from underrepresented backgrounds out there. It's just a matter of bringing their voices out and providing them with the same support that they wouldn't, that people who would have access to master's programs, et cetera, would have. Yeah, so again, through partnerships and basically working with the fellows closely throughout the year, throughout the 18 months, we're hoping to, establish a new normal sort of thing with writers from underrepresented backgrounds who have the same access as the rest of us.
Thank you, Mohisha. So not to hog any more time, I suppose in conclusion, yeah, we are committed to try and doing that and, building a more diverse and inclusive Irish literary and publishing scene, I suppose, to make the point that, Skene itself wants to reflect the society that we live in through our editorial, through all our projects, and it's very important to us what lens that we're using. And then we're also trying to collaborate a lot on the limited resources we have. We try and work in partnership and collaborate so that we're bringing greater strength to the projects and through the work that we do. So thank you all for listening to us, and we hope that was clear. And if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. And you can visit our website too if you want to find out a little bit more about any of the projects that we mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohisha and Grania. That was a fascinating presentation. They're beautiful books that you published so far, and the new list looks so exciting. And that scheme as well is something we can maybe talk about in questions as well, because it is so important to have those longer term structures, I suppose, beyond the one book or beyond that initial publication as well. Okay, we'll take questions at the end. If I didn't explain at the beginning, I'll just clarify now that we're going to each publisher is going to present for a few minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end, and I'll pass on any questions that you might have in the chat. So if you're watching on YouTube, you should have a little chat box on your right hand side that will allow you to add comments or questions, and we'll be getting them. The team will be passing them on to us. Okay, great. At this point, I'm gonna then move on to Unapologetic magazine. Unapologetic is a multidisciplinary, literary, cultural, and artistic response to the social issues and creative opportunities of contemporary Ireland. And Unapologetic is represented by founder Sandrine Uwase-Tahiro, an English PhD student in the University of Limerick. Sandrine's research, about which I've heard only good things in the School of English in the University of Limerick, centres on third generation African writers such as Afrofuturists who have emerged during the era of late liberalism and who have introduced multiple and nuanced perspectives for reflecting on African lives and aspirations. So Sandrine, I will invite you to, you should all be seeing Sandrine's screen already. Welcome, Sandrine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim and the Douglas Week for having me. So I'll just be presenting on Unapologetic and just why we thought it was something that was important to have and kind of like our future plans for the rest of the year. So in regards to why even the thought of Unapologetic came to my mind, I had recently in 2020 done a documentary called On Silencing Black Voices, and there we were looking at the issue of racism and how racism is such a taboo topic in Ireland, and how people are able to look at racism and be like, oh, that's just an American issue, it doesn't affect people in Ireland. And like, I'd come from a Rwandese Irish background, so I was like, and I've been in Ireland since 2006, so I was like, I have experienced racism, and by people stating that it was just an American issue or just an UK issue, like it dismissed my experiences of Ireland, and I wanted to take charge of that narrative. And it's something that with my PhD doing African literature and post-colonial, it's something where I've always seen where through African cultural texts, whether or not it's writing or film, it's an act of resistance and the importance of really centralizing one's voice. So when we did that in 2020, I saw like we got amazing support for that, but then I realized that sometimes getting people to either like use a voice note or be central to like a documentary, it's quite traumatizing for them. So I started to think of what are other different modes of self-expression, and I knew that there was other issues that went beyond me. So like, yes, I experienced racism, but then I also experienced sexism. So I was like, what other intersectional issues are happening in Ireland, and what other communities can I reach to and really contact in regards to like creating this safe space. So with that in mind, then I contacted my good friend Gareth Bryn, who is a member of the LGBTQT community, and we'd always talked about the different experiences that we have been marginalized in Ireland, and we both have a love for reading and writing. But again, we both couldn't see ourselves within the Irish literature discourse. So we thought that, okay, like that's our experiences, there has to be other communities that feel like that. So we really wanted to create not only a magazine, but a cultural space and a safe space where, again, like academics, activists, artists, anybody really who was like from a marginalized community or underrepresented could come in and talk about the different social issues, but from their unique perspective, as opposed to something that was like overgeneralized or too simplified. So we really wanted to create that, and we were really lucky that we had amazing support. So with Emma Penny, she's one of our board members, so she was like great and enthusiastic with it. And even with Skin Press, like we'd asked opinions and everything like that, and everyone was so supportive with that. So like that was the great element of it, where like it was a space that was clearly missing, but then again we got an amazing support. And the main element of it was the amazing thing that we found, that like when we came up with the theme change makers, we made it like very general in the sense of anyone can have a different interpretation of what change makers mean. And we were very nervous like when we started the magazine, because we only launched it last year, that we'd only get 5 people to submit it, and would like the magazine would be really small or something like that. But by the end of it, when we finalized the magazine, it was 100 pages long. And the most beautiful thing about it is anyone that we had contacted or people that submitted their work, they had this already written, or they had the drawing already done like 2-3 years ago. So like they just never had a space to put it in. So we saw the market of that. And again, it was something really rewarding, but like also overwhelming in regards to, it was a shame that it's taken that long. But we were really glad to be front here, like the front of it, but then also really provide room for other issues that, like, if people like even from my migrant community wanted to make up their own magazine, we've always offered to just give guidance and support that we received as well. So I'm just sharing just there, like even just with our cover page, and with that, I just we got a mixture of like hand drawings, paintings, and just digitized. And again, everyone did this for free, and they, as I say, like they already had all of these ideas there, and they just never had the space for it. So when we did, even with just the term unapologetic, like we really wanted to play on the sense of within the Irish discourse, and like even when it comes to like Irish identity, it's always something that's really thought and projected to just be white and fixed and Catholic. But by even me existing, like being Burundi's Irish, and that duality, and people from other marginalized and ethnic minorities, and by them existing, like we're all unapologetically Irish. And so like that's why we stuck with the name. And again, just so that even with young people, like when they're growing up and they're trying to find their way in society and try to understand the different social issues are happening, to have a magazine or to have like a cultural place there that they can look at. And that was something that was really important for us. And like in regards, so we split up our content just again, like in regards to poetry, academic essays, and even personal and nonfiction, where again we allowed our contributors to really just keep in mind that sense of change makers. And a lot of the essays and the poetry we got was from migrant communities, where they were talking about like existing in this in between in Ireland and having a dual identity, but again like not knowing how to even contextualize that, because we still haven't really developed the language of like critical race theory in Ireland or anything like that. for different ethnic minorities and people from the Afro-Irish community. So like we gave them an opportunity there to explore that, and we're really excited for like the next issue in regards to, again, giving them more opportunity to continuously explore these social issues. So again, it hasn't even been a year yet, but like in regards to our future plans, it's definitely organizing workshops with schools. So I did a workshop with the primary school, and there were kids which were in direct provision, and they actually like all have journals, and they document all their lives and different things that they go through. But the sad thing about it is when I went to the school, like they had always told their teacher that they didn't think that Black people could write or Black people were writers. So like when they saw me, like they were showing me like their sample of writing and stuff like that. So like I understood like that sense of you can't be something that you can't see. So we really want to do workshops, especially just for young people from underrepresented and marginalized community, to really highlight that they can become writers and they can become like curators, because we've been able to do it. So that's something that we really want to roll out for the rest of the year. And again, we've been doing like different social media campaigns highlighting marginalized voices in Ireland. So it's just like, as Gronland had stated, one of the main excuses where there isn't a lot of diversity when it comes to like the Irish literary discourse, it's like, oh, there's not that many diverse or marginalized people which are writing, but there actually is. So we really want to highlight that. So again, to kind of debunk that myth that we don't exist. And then the last part that is just kind of taking part in talks and events like we are today, to really highlight the power of activism and publishing and how the two go hand in hand. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandrine. Wonderful stuff. Yeah, that's fascinating. Loads to talk about there. If people want to find Unapologetic magazine, it's easily Googleable. The site is unapologeticmag.net. And it's a beautifully designed issue, and we hope there'll be many more. Okay, I will move on and introduce the Working Class Writing Archive, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and chat at the end. Okay, the Working Class Writing, just to remind you that you can, please feel very free to pop your questions and comments into the comment box on YouTube, and we'll pass them on. The Working Class Writing Archive, workingclasswritingarchive.ie, is a website and collection which brings together writing by working class writers and groups in Dublin that has never been catalogued, preserved, or archived before, and in some cases would otherwise have been lost forever. And representing the archive are its founders. Firstly, Sophie Meehan. Sophie is a poet, artist, and filmmaker from Dublin 8. Her work has appeared on Dublin Bus and on the Football Association of Ireland's website, among other places. She's working on her debut collection of poetry and is a co-founder of the Working Class Writing Archive with Dr. Emma Penny. Dr. Emma Penny began work on her monograph, Women Writing the Margins, as an Irish Research Council postdoctoral scholar. The book introduces readers to a literary and social history of writing in Irish working class culture, and also explores previously unmapped trans-peripheral connections between welfare rights activists in Ireland and the United States during the 1970s and 80s. Emma is currently working to extend these findings as a Fulbright Scholar at Howard University in Washington, D.C., conveniently coincidentally the location for this year's Douglas Week, where she is consulting the archives of the National Welfare Rights Organization, paying special attention to the creative writing produced by grassroots women's groups. Emma and Sophie, you're very welcome, and I'll hand over to you if you want to share your screen.
I think, can we hang on for a second? We won't share a screen straight away. We'll probably just
yeah, sure,
chat.
whenever suits you. Whatever way you'd like to do
that.
it. Yeah.
Cool. So hi everybody, and it's just so amazing to hear about the initiatives kind of like in more detail from Grania and Sandrine. So thank you. I just wanted to say just briefly before me and Sophie start talking about the work of this archive, that it kind of started off with when I was doing my PhD, and I came across a poem in a kind of a social policy report on poverty, and I came across this poem about a woman's experience in a welfare office in Dublin, and there was no real information on where this poem had come from, whether it was part of a movement in community publishing, whether it had been written in a writing group, or how it had come to be. It was just being presented as data in this report on poverty. So I started to kind of pull that string, and I spent a lot of time in the social sciences section of UCD library, where I started to find working class women's poetry published in these kind of social policy reports. So yeah, I guess we're fast forwarding to five years later from that point, where I had done a lot of work on my own in kind of trying to collect and go in and find more of these poems. And as it happened, it kind of opened me up to this kind of history of community publishing that I hadn't realized was there in working class communities in Ireland. And so I suppose like around 50 years ago, adult education, community education, unemployment centres around the country started publishing and, you know, writing a lot. But all of this work, I suppose, because it kind of happened within an unemployment framework or a back to work framework, seen as kind of like a remedial practice or a means to an end, it wasn't really, it was very much excluded from the kind of established art sector in Ireland. So even though there was this kind of huge amount of work being produced, it kind of had been lying in community centres all around Ireland, but specifically our archive is based in Dublin, and the reason for that is due to COVID, really. And me and Sophie both lived in Dublin, so we spent the last year going around to adult education centres, community centres, unemployment centres, and asking for the writing that had been produced in these centres over the past 50 years. And just to echo what Sandrine was saying, there was that sense of that overwhelming amount of work, and I think me and Sophie still feel that to this day. And I just wanted to say, in terms of the practice of this archival work, and to kind of echo back to what Kristen and Caroline were talking about at the beginning, that it is massively a collaboration and a co-creation of this archive. And every step of the way, certainly before me and Sophie started to collaborate and after, there has been a practice of asking the writers what writing meant, what this writing did, and why they were writing. What was the social use value of the writing? What was just so we could get their voices basically on the page, and understand and create a framework that was based on their understandings of the importance of this kind of cultural practice or literary culture. And I came across a book called Telling It Like It Is, which was published in Kilbarrack, and I recommend you go check it out. There is a PDF of it online. And it's basically about the importance of storytelling in these communities. It's called Telling It Like It Is. And a lot of that work kind of, I started to find connections, I suppose. So one of the things that comes up in the interviews with people about their writing is, in the first instance, the importance of writing for survival. So you get people saying things like, for us at times, poetry was a matter of life and death, or if I hadn't had a space to tell my story, I think I'd be dead now. So these are just some things that have come up in interviews with the writers. And then this practice of telling it like it is, this practice of having a space where you could come together and have your story validated in groups with other working class people who understood and could validate your experience, became very important. And I think it must have been around 5 years ago now that I came across another book called Telling It Like It Is, which was from the National Welfare Rights Organization movement in the United States, which is led primarily by Black women on welfare. So I started to kind of like look at the connections between this practice of telling it like it is, that it was producing an archive of poetry and creative writing as part of kind of a social movement, both in Ireland and the United States in these same decades. So that's the kind of work I'm doing now with my own archival work. But I think yeah, so I'll probably hand over to Sophie now, because it wasn't just about the groups. We started to get a lot of individual writers and poets submitting to the archive. So there was a lot of boxes under a lot of beds that I don't think maybe would have seen the light of day had we not, had the Arts Council funding to start this work.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? I've got headphones on. Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, whenever I'm invited to one of these things, usually by Emma, I always notice that, like, when you start, when I get to listen to people who are doing similar things to us, or archiving, or like, socially justice motivated projects and stuff like that, there's always so many similarities that I didn't even realize were there, kind of. So when I was listening to Skeen Press and to Sandrine, like, it really struck me the emphasis on collecting what's already there and giving space to what's already there, as opposed to this kind of history of, like, I remember Emma telling me about the history that came across in her research of, like, as relates to our project, of like middle class women coming into working class areas and being like, oh, I'm going to like teach these people how to write or how to create books or whatever, when in reality they were already doing that themselves and maybe just didn't have like a platform to have this get out to a wider audience. So I was really struck by like what Sandrine said about Unapologetic magazine, that there is so many people writing, but maybe they don't know that there are loads of other people writing. Like, maybe there's loads of people writing in direct provision, but they don't know that there are hundreds of other people in direct provision who are also writing. And yeah, I think just that's the difference, I think, when it comes from our own communities leading to create a space and a like a place for these stories and this work to be shown, that it's not like, it's not presuming that it's not already there. It's just taking what's already there and like allowing there to be a space for it to be read and consumed, and also to create networks between the writers who already exist. So for us, that's a really important function of the archive. It's not only bringing this work to the fore, but it's also creating a network for writers to realize that there's loads of other writers who are also working class, who also maybe write on similar themes or in similar styles, and that it's creating a way for them to relate to each other as well, because previously maybe that like network didn't exist. So it's very similar, like all of the what Skeen Press is doing and what Unapologetic magazine is doing. I just noticed like the similarities there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that idea of the network and creating networks, like when we say, like, why are we doing this archival work? Is it just to record a bunch of writing that would have been maybe lost or didn't have a centralized home where you could access it? And like, I think, yes, that is one of the points, but another one of the points is to create a space where, people get a sense that they're belonging to a literary culture, that they're belonging to a network of writers and writing groups. And one of the things that really struck me and Sophie was that, you could have a group in Ballymun, right? Like the Ballymun Read and Write Scheme, who have been producing poetry and stories in creative writing anthologies for the last 50 years. And then you could have a group in Kilbarrack who've been doing the same, or in Coolock who've been doing the same, but there's no connection between them. There's no network between them. There's no knowledge from the group in Ballymun that the group in Kilbarrack have been doing this, right? So I think that this is something that happens to under-resourced communities of writers, where the power and being able to be understood as part of a network or as part of a movement is kind of taken away from you or denied from you because of this kind of under-resourced position that you're kind of writing from. So I think that in terms of like an activist project, that is what the archive achieves. So you can go into Ballybock, for instance, which is known. So in Ballybock, we have the Larkin Unemployment Centre, which, a literary scholar might not necessarily go to find hundreds of poems and stories, but they're there. So creating this kind of realization or platform or history, and confronting people with the fact that working class people in Ireland have been writing, and sometimes these are the kinds of programs that gave them the opportunity to write for the first time and have their work published for the first time, were particularly these kinds of spaces. And I don't know, Sophie, if you want to just quickly before we end say a little bit about this archive just not being, I suppose, just a collection of data. We didn't want it to be, here's a load of work or here's a load of books. We really wanted to highlight the work of doing the archive. So how important building relationships was with people, because you're talking again about, as Sophie said, a community who, I don't know, might not necessarily be as trusting or isn't operating in the same framework as you. I mean, that definitely came across when I started my research, that my story as, being a working class academic and navigating my own moments of extreme precarity became very, very important. So there's a lot of emotional labor on both mine and Sophie's part that goes into this. And a lot of the relationships are kind of like built over coffees, and there's a receipt from having a pint with one of the writers.
We always say there's a game that you can play is to guess who had what when we meet Emma and the writer who ordered what. Just to say as well, this website is designed by an amazing working class artist and designer called Anya O'Hara, and they were really key as well to building the site and designing it. And it's very important to us, the mapping aspect of it, because this is something that has come up with other projects that I've come across through connections with Emma and this sort of work and the academic lens of things. What was it called, Emma, that one, the archive, the lib, or the big one? The Fed, yeah. Fed. That I noticed that they did the same thing. They organized it by area because they wanted it to be accessible to people, to be accessible to the people that were contributing to it. So somebody could come in to our archive, for example, and be like, I want to read stuff about Cabra because I'm from Cabra and I want to see what writers are writing about Cabra. And the Fed did the same thing where they catalogued everything by area to make it the most accessible and to just have it like make the most sense. It was a very intuitive thing, a very intuitive way to archive for us and for the writers.
And in terms of the future of the archive, we want the archive to be like an active and vibrantly growing space. So like this December, myself and Sophie are writing a forward for a new collection called 100 Poems from the North Wall. So the archive is already generating new work. So as well as like the discipline of archiving, we're also kind of now involved in community publishing. We encourage the writers to hold open mics and events in their own areas. So like local pubs, GAA clubs, football clubs, bringing literature into spaces where maybe like it hasn't really kind of had a strong cultural hold before, and to start teaching this in our kind of curriculums at third level, primary school, secondary school. We'd love to see it taught there too, and to kind of have a sense in which this writing it's both, had a social use value, sure, but is also a literary tradition, and has poems can be seen as like having a social use and having, a literary use, being a literary object in and of itself. So I think we'll end it there, but please feel free to explore at your own leisure.
It's workingclasswritingarchive.ie is the site.
Thanks so much, Sophie and Emma. And those links are all, if you're watching on YouTube, you can find those links. The team have been putting them in the chat. So please do explore. There's so much there. Let me see, what else do I want to say? Yeah, I mean, I love I do love the design of this website, the Working Class Writing Archive. It really visualizes what you were talking about, Sophie, in terms of kind of the network. It really visualizes that fact that these projects are going on in different communities, and that, you know, that, I mean, okay, in general, one thing that came through, you know, like as Sophie said, there's so many things that you know, these projects are speaking to each other even more closely than I thought when I invited when I invited you all to talk. You know, there's the common thread of collaboration and learning, this sense of validation that's brought through community. And a nice phrase that Sophie used, it was collecting what's already there. You know, all of these projects are in one way sort of making space for what's already there, rather than being like an editorially led process where you go out and say, we're looking for this kind of work. It's much more open than that. It made me curious to know more about what's already there. It's a big question, but I wonder if any of you would like to say more about what kind of work you saw coming through. Were there particular forms that came through really strongly? Are there particular forms that you sort of found yourself building the projects around? I mean, even thinking about skiing, there's even the 3 books that have been published so far are very different, but there's something there is something similar to them. They're concise, they're punchy. There's something very direct about them, and I'm just wondering, you know, if there are particular forms or themes that kept coming up in any of the work that you're collecting.
With our one, we found there was a lot of life writing, so like first person narrative in regards to what was life growing up in Ireland. So like it wasn't just in regards to like race, it was in regards to sexuality and identity, and kind of trying to come to terms with that, where, as I said earlier, like where there's this single narrative of what it means to be Irish. So with that, we found that there was a lot of people which had written the essays, like they'd done those like 5 years ago. There's one where there's spoken word poetry, which was one of the participants, the contributors had recorded that like when she was 18 and she's 25 now. So like as Sophie said, like those works are already there. It's just people just don't know, first of all, if other people are interested in that, because I think like when it comes to like publishing and things like that, like you are putting yourself out there, you don't know if you're going, like if people are going to perceive that, they're going to be able to resonate with that. So when it came to just identity, that was one thing that we found that everyone had explored that in their own shape or form years ago.
I think you're muted there, Gronland.
Oh, typical. I have to do something.
It always happens.
on techie stuff. But yeah, no, just building on what you were saying there. Yeah, I mean, we didn't see any particular form in what we're seeing. And I suppose one thing we were very conscious of too, in skiing, is not to pigeonhole any writer, and writers often articulate that just because I'm from a particular background, you're not going to get my sob story. You know, I'm not, you know, they might be writing in fantasy or another genre completely than memoir, and I think that's brilliant. It's trying to expand our range and ensure that people that we have the capacity to respond to different types of art forms as well. And I think that's why the Solstice Stories is really important for us, because it enables people to kind of essentially create their own book in whatever form. So like Waking Light that we're producing first, you know, it's poetry fragments, you know, it's playing with form as well, which is beautiful. So we're trying not to define that to allow it to come true. And I suppose particularly because the skiing has gone out and we've targeted writers from underrepresented backgrounds, and we've done that deliberately, even though a criticism of us, you know, has been in the past, you know, that we should be egalitarian, we should be for everybody. But the problem is, unless you target, people don't know you're there for them. So in an ideal world, if there wasn't structural inequality, we wouldn't be needed. And hopefully in the future that the more and more people that get involved, you know, initiatives like skiing, you know, skiing can evolve into something, you know, more, you know, different again. But I suppose what we don't want to do is ensure that writers can write what they want and have the artistic freedom to do that. And it was very interesting last year when we were listening to Nidhi Zak and Phil Mullen and Owen DeVardoon. They were talking at a literary event probably a few years ago now, before lockdown, because we were all in attendance, and they were talking about feeling the weight and the burden of trying to promote their cultural expression for their whole community and promote rights for their whole community, that often they didn't have permission to be able to express themselves artistically. So it is, and also what Cedrine said there, there is a lot of stories that people also want to tell that are, first person narrative, that are life and lived experience as well. So there's space for all of it. But I just want to highlight that other people are bursting to work in other art forms and do things as well. So it's a very exciting time, absolutely.
I just add there from our own experiences of just when you said there, Grania, about just because I'm from this background doesn't mean I have to write in a certain way or about a certain subject. We had a lot of experiences of people contacting us when our submission call was out, saying like, oh, I have, I'm working class, but like I have this one poem that's working class because it's about like this certain thing, or or oh, I think this work that I have is working class. And we were like, no, like if you're working class, then your writing is working class writing. Like you could write like sci-fi or love poems or whatever. We want it all because we want to see what's, we want, yeah, like you said, like freedom of artistic expression. And I feel like in the Irish landscape, especially in film and television, I would say that like there's a very narrow view of what working class experience is. Like if it doesn't have gangsters in it, it's not seen as working class expression, so yeah, same with us.
And I think like with form, like what forms are popular in the archive, I think it's like really interesting to kind of point out that I think in terms of like novels from that 50-year long of publishing that we're archiving, I think 0 to 1 maybe novel. So it's shorter form work, and it's a lot of poetry, a lot of short stories. And I think it's interesting when we started to ask writers why these forms, that one of the things that came up was that classic Audre Lorde bit that, poetry is cheap, it's accessible, you don't need a lot of paper, you don't need a lot of time, you don't need a lot of resources. So it's actually suited to people who don't have resources and don't have a lot of time, like women living on social welfare payments, or people who are very busy and are working multiple jobs. So I think that was really interesting, that was kind of something being articulated through the work. And the poetry itself, I don't know if Sophie would agree with me here, but I think that the poetry tends to kind of articulate something that's happening immediate. It's like an imminent thing. So something bad happened to you that day, or there's a strong emotion coming through, it's a poem. Whereas I feel like the short stories kind of tend to map backwards and be more kind of looking at the structural, or looking at the kind of historical aspects, like childhood, and kind of being more overarching. And the poetry itself as well, I find interesting, because it is very, it kind of undermines the kind of lyric tradition of like the singular poet voice being like all knowing. It's much more community orientated. So yeah, I don't know, that answers the question.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. That's exactly what I was getting at, and it's really interesting to hear that. The community-oriented thing is obviously very interesting as well, especially in that there are commonalities there with what Skene's doing in terms of working with this new series where a team will be working on a book, and that I can see the value of that, working with students put together a literary magazine in UL this term. It's rare enough to have the technical design expertise. The idea of actually being paired up, getting the opportunity to work with someone who knows how to do that is amazing. There was one question here specifically for Skene, so I'll put this to Grania and Mahito. If you could talk a little bit about how the idea of conscious learning works in practice.
Yeah, and thank you. And yeah, I suppose we really feel that so much, I suppose, in publishing, we bring a particular aspect, but we always feel we've so much to learn with the new press as well. And also working with a range of different people and groups, and people's needs are so different, and working cross cultures, working in different languages, so on, all the different ways we want to work. And not to be, I suppose, our first step is not to be afraid of that, and to say, look, we're here to learn, we're here to share knowledge and engage with each other. So that's the principle that we're operating on. But how we do it in practice is a lot of reflection. So what we would do is, we have tools in the press to kind of, evaluate and reflect on projects and practice that we're doing, and see how things worked, where they didn't work, and how we can change that. So we're trying to build in active learning, and change. So for example, if we're working with a writer and something isn't working, that we can say, that's okay, we can change that. Like we actually have the power over this to change anything that isn't working and do it better. And that's the spirit, I suppose, that we want to implement, but all the time. And we're very, so with authors that we work with, we talk through that at the beginning. In our own project work, we would build that in and spend time at our meetings discussing that and drawing out learning. We've put in place evaluation. Mojito can refer to that there. Just even the first phase of Play It Forward has been evaluated to see what we did learn and how we could have done it better in terms of reaching out to people, because it's so critical how we reach people and how we continuously then build that in to our model, so that we're always reaching people that are not known to us, that don't have, that don't know us, that that we're constantly opening up the spaces for people. So it's in that spirit, but we do have tools to monitor that and see how we are doing and what we're learning, and we change things on the basis of that, which is great. We're able to do that because we're new and small, and we don't have a lot of institutional baggage. So we can pretty much, it helps us to keep fresh and try and keep on our toes, and be critical as well.
Thanks, Grania. I'll just really quickly mention the Play It Forward evaluation, because we just completed that. And essentially what we looked at in that document was a lot of information regarding the way we ask questions, and that's been something that keeps coming back. And so in our work with the traveler community, in our work with marginalized community in general, the way we ask questions is so important, and it gives back a certain response if you're not careful. And so what this evaluation also goes through is just sort of where the data that we could pull from our answers, where like the strengths of that and also the weaknesses. And so it was just a very honest look, I suppose, at the pros and cons of asking questions in a certain way, and also the responses that those ways elicited. So by preparing this huge document, we're really able to get a good sense of, for the next time, what we would change and what worked really well. So there's just an example there.
Thanks, Mojito. Did Emma, did you have your hand up, or did it go down?
I did, but I didn't realize the times, because you probably have to finish up soon, right? But you could talk for hours.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, I'm happy to go on for a few more minutes if you guys are, and if you have questions for each other, please do ask as well. I'll have to put a stop to this at some point, but this is there's so much to say about all these projects. I think it's really interesting. So go for it.
Yeah. I did have a question. I guess, the first thing I'll say just real quickly is the event Grania was talking about was organised by myself and Chiamaka Enyemadi, and it was in the RIA, I think, back in 2018, and it's available online. There's a whole YouTube recording of it, and I think Chinadu Muadu makes a really good point at that event, where I think, and which is shared across that event, where he says that, what does solidarity from the establishment look like, from publishing and publishers, and particularly white Irish people in general that have some kind of power, and that he said that a chance to not be the one always talking about the difficulties, and a chance to talk about joy, a chance to talk about desire. And Owen de Varden spoke to that as well. He was saying we want a chance to not just be invited on the radio show or on the panel to talk about the difficulties of being a migrant writer or the difficulties of being a traveller writer. We want to be able to come and talk about the joy and the passion and the desires and the and those kind of things too. So creating that space, and I think that was really powerful for people. But the question I wanted to ask was whether or not Grania and Sandrine have found any kind of limitations in terms of the activism they want to do through their work with print. So has print presented kind of any kind of a limitation in terms of where the kind of direction of this activist publishing project is going? And the reason I'm asking that is because I was at a community publishing project here workshop here in DC last week, and one of the guys, Mark Nowak, he runs the Worker Writers School, and he was talking about how he's been involved in projects where they're kind of they're using projection, so they're like using like neon signs in like local like shops in areas to kind of like present poetry, or projecting onto like big grain silos in like rural America and stuff like that. So they're using projection, and I'm just wondering like whether or not Ireland could maybe, whether or not print is a limitation in your activist projects, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose the form is always limited, isn't it? And I mean, what we're trying to do with, well, I mean, I love the idea of the projections as well, but just to say, Owen's book, Why the Moon Travels, it spawned such a long-lasting book, and it spawned so many sub-projects. And I think that's the beauty of it, that it, like Leanne's illustrations to the book are hanging in IMA at the moment for people to admire, and the stories behind that. And it was also projected on the walls in Galway, all around Galway, for the Minchur celebration, the Minchur Festival of Nomadic Cultures, Mishlor. So, you know, it does go on, but you're completely right. And I suppose what we're trying to do with the Solstice Stories is, you know, because there's work with the visual artist, it creates great scope for what we can do with the books and the kind of ways we can engage audiences and the public as well. So we are trying to think through some of that and how the works can be presented, how we can reach bigger audiences, community-based audiences that the author is connected to as well. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's trying to push out those ideas all the time, and you know, we're trying to do that with the authors, but also bringing in different expertise of people who would have an eye for that and be able to help us with that. So absolutely.
With us, because we've only done our first issue online, we actually found that like it worked better because it was more accessible, and like kind of like even when it comes to the price of it, no one had to pay for it. So that's something that we're thinking about now, approaching the second issue, on whether or not we're going to go to print. And I do think it'll be limiting in the sense of like even deciding like what bookshops are going to be able to sell the books for us and stuff like that. But what I found that like what's worked really well for us is in regards to like the sense of community and the fact that everyone has just been sharing it, and everyone has been like, oh, have you looked at Unapologetic, and you know, if you have a piece of work, like you should contact them. And we found that like with even like as I said, Skin Press were able to help us like spread the news. So like it has been really like we've been grateful in that regards, where different established or like anything like that communities which are doing a lot of publication, like they've been giving us like a lot of hand, like in regards to like, okay, this is what the limitations of printing versus online. But like in our regards, like with COVID and it being the first issue and just trying to test it out, we found that online just did work better because we're able to see the demographic of like what people are accessing it and what countries as well. So that is something that we are keeping in mind as we're approaching the second issue, on whether or not we're going to do it in print.
Thanks, Sandrine. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was going to ask about media as well, but you've more or less all answered that question, because it kind of struck me looking through the projects that that there are these sub projects within every project, and that you're all doing projects that are in some way multimedia. You know, even I thought of Skeena as the more traditional publisher in this group, but you know, even then there's lovely audiobooks of Onda Vardoon's book available, and Rosalie McDonough as well. So it struck me that you're all these are all dynamic projects that I guess are evolving to the different, you know, a book is not one thing these days, and a magazine even is not one thing. Okay, do you guys have any more questions for each other? I don't want to bring an end to this because it's great, but on the other hand, maybe we should try to wrap up.
I think my dinner is ready. I can smell.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go.
Yeah, well, that is the best reason always to wrap up. Okay, well, let's just thank all of our contributors. So this was a real pleasure. It was so great to hear about all your projects in detail, and we're so grateful for having you all with us tonight. Emma, Sophie, Sandrine, Grania, and Mahito, thanks so much. And just a reminder to everybody that you can find all these projects online or on this YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see links to your right, and you will also, you know, through this YouTube channel, if you want, you can watch the closing event of Douglas Week tonight at 11:30 GMT, and you can also catch up on, you know, almost everything that has happened in Douglas Week. You can watch it back. It's all archived there, so please check that out. Thanks once again, and we will say good night, and enjoy the rest of